I can't believe it's already July. I have no idea how we got here so fast. I can only come out in the mornings now because it is so hot, but the harvests are slowly coming in. I'm getting zucchinis and peas and kale and all kinds of good stuff, which means that we're back for another video on what seeds you can be sowing this month. And if you've seen any of my other videos, it's going to be a little similar where there's a lot of succession sowing happening, but today is different because there are fall vegetables that we have to be planting here in our cold, short seasons. So I'm gonna get into that in the back half of this video, so you're definitely gonna wanna stick around. If you're new here, my name is Bree from Urban Gardening Canada, and I garden in Ottawa Zone 5. Now, it is hot. It seems like Europe and even North America are going through a heat dome, so it does feel weird to talk about fall plants, but the truth is that here in Ottawa, at least, I'm 93 days away from my first frost, which means that I need to start planning for my fall vegetables because they generally need that much time in order to get to harvest. So it's important that we talk about them in this video. And normally I don't rush you. I can say, oh, you can plant this anytime during the month, but when it comes to the fall ones, I'm rushing you on that one, and I'm sorry for that, because you're definitely, if you haven't started them, you're gonna wanna get into that. So before we get to that, let's talk about the seeds that you can direct sow, because those ones are always easy to do since you don't have to do much work and there's not much equipment involved. All right, so first up is a classic, and that is beans. In my opinion, anytime you harvest something and there's space in your garden, fill it with beans. This one is the fastest to grow. It produces a ton, and it doesn't mind being planted in the July heat. So this could be pole beans or bush beans. It's really up to you. And just be mindful that when they're first growing, animals love to eat them, including slugs. So you're gonna want to plant them, keep them well watered, and protect them in order to make sure that they don't get ravaged before you even have a chance to harvest them. But protecting them under something like insect netting or shade cloth is a really good way to make sure that they survive any type of attacks. And I do have a video on that I will link below for you to check out. The next up is lettuce, and I know that it's really hot out and lettuce loves cold weather, but there are varieties of lettuce that can handle the heat. So it's just about adjusting the varieties that you are planting. So for example, butterhead lettuces are really good at being bolt resistant and can handle the heat. So I have a Tom Thumb butterhead and another red variety that I'm going to be planting, and those do really well. I have them in the garden right now where all my romaine has bolted. These butterheads actually haven't bolted at all, so they're a really good choice in the heat of the summer. All right, next up is beets. This is another one that is good to just keep sowing every single month. So this is a plant that likes both the cold but can handle the hot weather. So the most important thing though is that when you are planting those seeds is to keep them really well watered, because with the heat, the evaporation is high, which means the soil is drying out constantly, and it's always that first couple centimeters that are drying out. So you do want to make sure that you're watering regularly, because your seeds live within that level of soil that's drying out all the time. And that's really the biggest concern that you have to have. But otherwise, beets are going to start growing now, and then when the weather does cool down in September and October, if they're still growing, they're going to be able to handle the cold temperature as well, which is always good for us. And then carrots is the next one, and this is exactly the same thing, is that you want to keep it really, really well watered, especially because carrot seeds are very small and sit very close to the surface. So if you wanted to plant the seeds, water them, and cover them with something that's going to hold in that moisture, that's going to be really beneficial for you. And again, as they're growing and maturing, when the weather cools down, they love that cold weather, so they're the perfect one to be succession sowing right now. All right, I'm going to say this one again. If you watched my June video, you already know my biggest experiment, and that is planting corn. I really recommend trying to plant corn. If you are going to do it, I would do it earlier in July and not later. I actually just planted some corn seeds on the weekend, which was like June 28th or something like that. So I'm going right to the end of June. We went on a drive through the countryside a couple weeks ago, and even the farmer's corn was only about a foot tall. So I'm not that far behind, and it's really good because especially at my allotment, I had a few squash plants that got decimated by animals or pests, and so I have a big open space. So I just direct sowed a bunch of corn in there because it's going to grow really fast. It takes up a ton of space, and who doesn't love growing corn? It's just so much fun to grow. So I really recommend, if you have some space in your garden that can take a large plant such as corn, totally I recommend trying to direct sow it and seeing if you can get a harvest before your first frost. Especially if you're in a zone 5 or warmer like I am. It might be a little bit more difficult if you're in a zone 3 or colder, but there are certain varieties out there that are dwarf sizes of corn that only grow 3-4 feet tall. So those ones are really good where you're going to get a harvest earlier. So it's really all about the variety and making sure that that days to maturity fits in with your first frost date. Okay, so the final two for the veggies is to direct sow kale or Swiss chard. And this is best if you either absolutely love it or if you didn't grow it yet or your insects have taken over it. So for me, I'm not going to direct sow any Swiss chard or kale because I already have it in my garden and they grow huge and they're gonna take me all the way into October and they're not gonna die. But if you haven't planted any yet, it's not too late to be direct sowing it. So things like Swiss chard are really drought tolerant because they have a succulent type of stem on them. So they're really good from that perspective in the heat, but they actually absolutely love the cold, which means if you're sowing them now, they will go all the way into October for you. And kale, of course, people know that it tastes sweeter once it's been hit by a frost. So if you plant that now and it grows, you can take it all the way to your first frost and let it get hit, and you're going to be able to enjoy it from now until then. So I definitely recommend, if you haven't started those, that you can start them outside, but you can also start them inside, which I'll get to later in this video. Okay, let's talk about the herbs. So there really is only one herb that you can be direct sowing right now, and that is basil. Basil absolutely loves the heat, so this is prime time for it. But again, the seeds are really small, so you do want to make sure that if you are direct sowing it, that you keep the soil really well watered until they start to germinate. And then as they get larger, you can reduce the watering, but that is always like the key factor when you're direct sowing anything in the heat of summer. You can try direct sowing cilantro or dill if you want to, but with this heat, they're more likely going to bolt. But it's always worth an experiment if you do want to try and get other herbs in there. Especially for me, I always question how dill pickle is a thing, considering pickles are maturing in July and August, and dill likes the cold weather of May and June or October. And how can they be put together if they grow at separate times? So for me, every single time I'm harvesting my cucumbers for pickles, I never have any fresh dill, which means there has to be a way to be growing dill. So if you do like to make pickles, I recommend at least trying to direct sow the dill and seeing if it works. But for sure, you'll be able to get basil growing for you right now, and just experiment if you have enough seeds with your dill, or if you even like cilantro, since not a lot of people do. It's just an interesting one that you can try and grow that starts from seed and goes to maturity really quickly. All right, let's talk about flowers. So this is a more limited one now because especially in our short seasons, your plant has to be able to handle the heat right now, but also be able to flower in the cool weather. So we're really trying to think about that transition period where even if it is boiling hot and you're sweating right now, in just a couple months, it really is going to start cooling down. I even heard from the long range forecast that we might be in for a cool fall, which is really sad for us since our spring was so cold. So you just really want to keep this in mind, which means that your first flower is calendula. Calendula will grow in this heat. It doesn't love it. It prefers cold weather, but by sowing your calendula now, it means that you are going to have blooms when that cool weather comes, which means you're planning ahead, and that's always great because when the fall comes, we're often short for blooms, and this one is going to fit that bill perfectly. So this is the same for pansies or violas. You can also sow these right now because they love the cool weather. You'll be able to have them grow and blooming when the season is cooling down. But again, these seeds are so tiny, so you are going to want to make sure that you're keeping them well watered until they're starting to germinate. I think that's probably the hardest part about pansies is just how small their seeds are. So make sure you know exactly where you're planting them so you can keep them watered. Even up to twice a day would be really good. But once they start growing, they're going to be able to give you a lot of flowers in the fall time, which means that you can have these blooms. Since a lot of these greenhouses don't sell pansies in the fall, you can have, they generally only sell mums from what I see. So if you want to have other flowers, then you got to be thinking ahead, and that means right now. Okay, so this is the last flower on the list for me, and that is cornflowers or blue boys. These ones are super easy to direct sow, and they will go right into the fall too. I absolutely love them. They come in such incredible colors: whites, pinks, blues, dark purples. They're so beautiful, and they bloom profusely around here. They're a native plant, so the bees absolutely love them, and they will also self-seed for you next year, which means that if you're going to sow them now, you won't have to sow them next year, or you won't have to sow as many. And again, they love the cool weather too, so once you sow them now, you're going to be getting blooms that go all the way until your first frost date, which means that your garden's going to look beautiful all the way till the very end. Okay, before we get into the fall vegetables, I do want to mention that I have a couple products that you can grab online. The first one is a self-paced gardening course, and this is great for anyone regardless of how long you've been growing for. It really covers absolutely everything from the seeds that you need to buy, how to sow them, how to care for your garden, all the way to harvesting. And really the entire focus of it is through the lens of sustainability. As our summers are getting wildly hot, some of us are experiencing endless rain. Here in Ottawa, for the first year since I've moved here, it literally never rains, which means the soil is so dry, and plants are struggling because of that. And so this course is all about the ways that you can set up your garden so that way you're prepared for heavy rains, thunderstorms, whipping winds, or even drought. So if you did want to check that out, I will link it in the description below for you, and there's even a free preview that you can sign up for, so that way you can get a feel for it. And I highly recommend it, especially if you're a gardener anywhere from the years 3 to 8 years of gardening. You're really going to gain a ton of information from this. And the second product that I have is just a really cute grocery list that you can get, and it's very inexpensive because I want to make sure that you can enjoy the products that I put out without having to break the bank. And it's really it's I think 5 or 6 page grocery list that has over 200 items on it. So rather than having to stick your face in the pantry or the fridge every single time you're grocery shopping and coming home and forgetting something, this list prompts you. So you can print it off, you can laminate it, and then use a erasable marker, and every single day you can wipe it off and start over again. And it's set up based off the different parts of the grocery store, so that way you go through the produce section, you go through the freezer section, and you can get everything without missing anything. So I'm also going to leave that in the link below for you guys for you to check out. So now let's go into the fall vegetables that we sadly already have to be planning for. Okay, so the fall vegetables are a little different because you're likely going to have to grow them indoors, which makes it a little bit more complicated than if you were just direct sowing, because a lot of us have obviously already put away our seed starting stations that we use with our grow lights. But the good news is that most fall vegetables are huge, so you really don't need to grow that many of them in order to fill up your garden space. So when you are planting the seeds inside, you really just need a single tray, especially if you have one with multiple cell packs. So if you have a tray that has the 72 cell packs or even the 54 cell pack, that's probably all you really need to be growing. Okay, let's start with lettuce, kale, and Swiss chard. So you can direct sow these outside like I mentioned earlier in the video, but you can also start them inside too. And the good thing about starting these inside is that it's temperature controlled, and you can take advantage of watering regularly and not have to worry about evaporation from the heat. And also, it's not too early to be starting them, because once they're ready to be planted outside, you can be harvesting them all the way until October. So it's different than in the springtime, where in the spring you can be starting too early because, of course, if the snow doesn't melt, you can't plant outside. But now, if you start here, you can plant out at any point in time because the weather is perfect for it. So if you really struggle with direct sowing outside because of that heat and the evaporation, I really recommend starting them indoors, and that's going to make it a lot easier for you. But again, with the lettuce, you're going to have to succession sow it again in August anyways, but the kale and the Swiss chard, if you start them inside now, it's just a one-time thing because they will take you all the way until your first frost. Now, there's a few other ones. There's 4 other ones that you can be starting inside. Probably more, but these are the 4 that I'm gonna let you know about, and that is cabbage, kohlrabi, broccoli, and cauliflower. These ones take up a lot of space in the garden, which is where I'm saying you don't have to plant as many of them. It's interesting because in the seed packets you'll get hundreds of them, but I personally can't fit 100 cabbage in my garden. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to grow anything else. But these ones are a perfect time to be starting now. And like I mentioned, I normally don't like to rush you and I say, oh, you can be starting them at any time in July or whatever month I am doing this video on, but this one specifically, you need to start them now. End of June is a really good time to be starting them. So like I mentioned, I have 93 days of frost-free days left, and some of my cabbage are anywhere from 100 to 120 days to harvest, which means I'm now past my first frost date. And yeah, once they get to a larger size, they can handle a light frost, but if we do get a hard frost on our first frost date, then I'm really, really cutting it close. So if you're in a zone 4 or colder, then I would start looking for varieties. For example, I'm growing a tiara cabbage variety, and that's only a 45-day to harvest cabbage because it only grows about softball size. So look for varieties that are shorter, that are going to fit whatever time you have left between now and your first frost date. But I really recommend starting them now indoors, so that way you have control over the temperature and the watering. And then once you harvest your summer garden, you'll have space for the fall one. And honestly, I find the fall garden to be the most underrated garden. It is so fun gardening in the fall. Everybody else has packed up everything and they're done for the year, and you get to go out and you're still harvesting lettuce, greens, you're still harvesting other foods, and the temperature is cooler, so it's easier to work outside. The bugs have pretty much gone away, so your pest pressures are almost non-existent. And the pests bugging you personally are almost non-existent too. It's such a beautiful, beautiful time to be gardening. So if you've never grown a fall garden before, I really recommend trying it this year because it is so much fun. And I would say it's almost my preferred season to be growing in, which is so surprising, but I really, really love that fall garden time. And it's a lot easier to be doing any other work that you need to be doing outside too because it's cooler. And I never mentioned it, but if you don't know how to find your first frost date, if you're a newer gardener, just do a web search of your city name and your first frost date, and it's going to give you a range. So for example, in Ottawa, it's October 1st to the 10th. So you can be conservative and choose October 1st as your first frost date, or you can wing it and try for that October 10th one. Or if you have been gardening for a couple of years and you keep a garden journal, you might have written down when your first frost date was, so you know best for your personal microclimate in your backyard. But doing today's date to your first frost date will give you how many frost-free days you have left, so that way you can choose which varieties work best for you for your fall garden. And of course, if you grow under cover such as hoop houses, then you don't even need to worry about your first frost date because you're going to cover all your plants anyways. And I have a full video on everything that you need to know to grow under hoop houses, so you can check that video out. I'll also link that below for you, and that's going to extend your season for weeks beyond everybody else's, which is such a great tool for you to have. And that's the thing about being a short season gardener, is that summer just gets here and we already have to start planning for fall, and that's just the way it works around here. So I hope that you did find today's video helpful, and if you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and check out this video here. Bye.